Hey you, yes you, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let's get into tonight's true crime case. So don't forget subscribe this channel and turn on notification. Story 1. The heat inside the prison walls of Guayaquil on November 12, 2024, was stifling. Even the thick concrete could not keep the sun's weight from bearing down on the sprawling complex that held thousands of inmates, many far beyond its intended capacity. I had been sent there as part of an international human rights observation team, tasked with evaluating prison conditions and inmate treatment in some of South America's most overcrowded facilities. My expertise in security auditing had brought me to difficult places before, but nothing had prepared me for what would unfold that day. I arrived early in the morning, escorted by a small contingent of guards through several metal gates and into administrative offices adjacent to the prison's maximum security wing. From the outside, the compound was a fortress, towers with armed personnel, electrified fences, and layers of steel doors. Inside, it was something else entirely. A system of chaos hidden beneath the pretense of order. My first impression was not of violence, but of tension. Tight, invisible wires stretched to their limits, vibrating with pressure. I moved through the corridors alongside a warden and a translator, noting conditions and taking quiet mental notes. Cells meant for 2 held 6. Walls were covered in graffiti, gang symbols, personal messages, desperate markings. Some inmates leaned silently against the bars, watching us pass. Others ignored us altogether, immersed in their routines. In my line of work, you learn to listen to the silence more than the noise. And the silence here wasn't peaceful. It was defensive. Just after midday, a series of short, distinct sounds echoed through the corridor. Metal clanging in an irregular pattern, followed by a pause, then another burst of noise. At first, it seemed like construction work or a dropped object, but the guards stiffened. Radios crackled. The warden suddenly walked faster. I kept pace, uncertain. We were led into a secure observation room, its walls fitted with reinforced glass. From there, I watched the courtyard, where inmates had begun to congregate in unusual numbers. Something was wrong. The noise grew louder, the rhythm more chaotic. Then, a signal. A flare of motion in the courtyard, and everything unraveled. Inmates ran in all directions, some climbing barriers, others chasing or fleeing. I saw guards retreating, yelling into radios, trying to regain control. The control system had fractured completely. From our vantage point, we had no direct contact with what was unfolding in the main yards. The prison, massive and compartmentalized, was a maze of independent wings. And now it was becoming a war zone of confusion. Security protocol dictated lockdown. Gates slammed shut. Alarms sounded. My group, along with a few staff, was moved quickly to a secured administrative shelter deep in the central building. It was windowless and cold, a room designed for emergencies but not for comfort. I sat on the floor with a few others, listening to updates on a handheld radio. Terms were used sparingly. Disturbance, isolated flare-up, containment underway, but the tone of the voices betrayed them. Fear crept through their words. The hours dragged on, each minute longer than the last. We were told to remain in place. From the shelter, we could hear occasional thuds, distant crashes, and once what sounded like a stampede overhead. A backup generator kicked in, casting everything in a sickly yellow light. I took out my notebook, not to write, but to focus my thoughts. My mind returned to the faces I had seen that morning. Young men, some no older than teenagers, already marked by the brutal rhythm of prison life. Men with histories, yes, but also with futures hanging by threads. Late in the evening, a team of heavily armored guards arrived to escort us to a safe wing. The riot had been contained, they said, but pockets of resistance remained. They led us through back corridors, some smeared with dust and debris. I passed overturned benches, a broken CCTV camera dangling by its wires, and a corridor littered with torn clothing and papers. Yet, despite the disorder, there was no sign of blood, no graphic horror, just the evidence of panic and desperation. By the time we reached the exit gate, the prison was locked down entirely. No one moved without authorization. Helicopters circled above. Outside, local law enforcement had set up barricades and lights. News crews had begun to gather, held back by military personnel. I was quickly taken to a staging area for debriefing, my report requested as soon as I was safe. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in a small hotel room, the walls closing in, trying to assemble meaning from everything I had witnessed. In the following days, news trickled in. The incident had not been spontaneous, but coordinated. A calculated response to ongoing tensions between rival groups within the prison. Despite the chaos, casualties were minimal thanks to swift containment. Yet the damage extended beyond injuries or broken infrastructure. The riot was a symptom, not an anomaly. In my report, I wrote about the invisible fractures I had noticed, the overcrowding, the understaffed units, the mix of rival factions housed in proximity, the failing infrastructure. But more than that, I described the atmosphere of pressure, of unresolved tensions slowly boiling beneath the surface. I focused not on violence, but on the conditions that breed it, the lack of space, the absence of hope, and the architecture of fear. Months later, when I returned to Ecuador to present findings at a regional summit, I was told that reforms were being considered. A proposal to reduce inmate population through rehabilitation programs had gained traction. Small steps, perhaps, but steps nonetheless. I knew better than to expect sweeping change, but I had seen firsthand how quickly systems break when their foundations are left unchecked. What happened in Guayaquil was not just a prison riot. It was a warning. It reminded me that containment without care is not order, and silence without justice is not peace. The walls may have held that day, but their cracks are growing, and unless we learn from them, they will crumble again. Story 2. Zhuhai had always seemed like a city suspended between two worlds, modern glass towers rising beside quiet alleyways, ocean breezes carrying the scent of jasmine, and the ever-present hum of electric scooters threading through the streets like water in narrow streams. I had been in China for 3 months when the event occurred, working on a project focused on smart traffic systems. My assignment placed me at the edge of innovation, observing how AI and urban planning were reshaping public safety in densely populated areas. On the morning of November 11, 2024, I woke early to prepare for a routine visit to a transportation control center in the Xiangzhou district. The sky was clear, the air calm. As part of my project's final phase, I was collecting data on pedestrian flow and traffic coordination along several high-density intersections. My role was purely observational, focused on infrastructure, system response times, and automated signaling efficiency. I carried a backpack with a tablet, data logger, and notebook, tools of routine, never designed for disruption. By mid-morning, I had reached the intersection of Jinghua Road and Ingbin Avenue, a junction that served as a lifeline between residential neighborhoods and commercial zones. I stood at a designated observation point near a tree-lined sidewalk, watching the patterns unfold, children crossing with parents, elderly pedestrians moving at cautious paces, commuters on e-bikes weaving between cars. The flow was organic yet guided. Digital signage above the road flashed updates in both Mandarin and English, warning of typical delays. The traffic, at first, was unremarkable. Buses hissed to a stop. Private cars moved in coordinated sequences. Cameras and sensors embedded at the intersection relayed data to a nearby control center, which I could see perched atop a low-rise building across the street. Everything seemed to be operating within normal parameters. Then, without warning, the ordinary fractured. A silver sedan, newer model, entered the intersection at a speed well beyond the limit. At first, I assumed it was a simple case of brake failure or inattentiveness, something mechanical. But the car didn't slow. It swerved sharply toward a median, striking signage and careening back toward the pedestrian zone. My instincts pulled me back. I moved behind a row of public bikes stationed along the curb and watched in stunned silence as chaos rippled through the space. The car mounted the sidewalk, veering erratically. People scattered. Some fell. Some ran into shops. The vehicle moved as if steered with intention, not confusion. That was the moment it became clear to me. This was not an accident. Emergency systems responded almost immediately. Street-side bollards, designed to rise during vehicular threats, deployed seconds too late. Automated signals turned red across the intersection. Traffic halted, but the damage had already been done. The vehicle crashed into a storefront before finally stopping. The sound of shattering glass echoed down the corridor of buildings. I remained still for several moments, absorbing the surreal stillness that followed. A low alarm began to ring from a speaker nearby, and I stepped out from behind the bikes to take stock of the surroundings. Authorities arrived quickly, local police, fire units, ambulances. The area was cordoned off with efficiency that only comes from experience. I identified myself to a public safety officer and was quickly moved to a secure perimeter zone for questioning. In the hours that followed, I submitted a statement detailing what I had observed: vehicle make, trajectory, approximate speed, time of impact. My role as an outside observer, combined with the fact that I had been documenting traffic systems, made my testimony particularly valuable. Officials from the Transport Bureau contacted my organization directly. I was asked to assist in the preliminary review of the smart traffic data logs to help reconstruct the timeline. The process was intense but orderly. The car had not entered from a monitored toll route, which meant it bypassed several standard tracking checkpoints. Investigators later confirmed that the license plates had been obscured, and while facial recognition systems captured the driver, the identity required confirmation. What I saw in the frame, briefly, was a face devoid of emotion. Not rage, not panic, just a flat focus. By evening, the city was quiet again, but the impact lingered in the air. The intersection had been cleared, but yellow barriers remained. The damaged storefront was shuttered. News of the event spread across digital platforms, though information was managed with restraint. Authorities urged calm, and official statements focused on public safety and system resilience. Over the following days, I was involved in the analysis of sensor data to understand how the vehicle bypassed early warnings. Our review highlighted a momentary delay in object classification by the AI software. Milliseconds, perhaps, but enough to blunt the initial response. Yet it wasn't a technological failure that stood out to me. It was the chilling precision of the attack. Authorities later confirmed that the driver had acted alone. No political statement, no manifesto. Just a set of coordinates entered into a navigation system, followed by a sharp deviation from the route, a maneuver through side streets, and a final sprint into the heart of a crowded zone. Motive remained unclear. The individual had no criminal record, no known affiliations. The only thread they found was a recent series of financial setbacks and isolation from family. No singular reason, just fragments. The city responded not with fear, but with resolve. In the weeks that followed, urban engineers worked with municipal authorities to update rapid response triggers in intersections across Zhuhai. My own reports fed into proposals for faster barrier deployment and enhanced predictive analysis within AI modules. The emphasis was on prevention, not punishment. On my final day in Zhuhai, I returned to the intersection. It had reopened. Trees had been replanted, the signage replaced. People walked across it once again, children and elders and commuters. Life had resumed its rhythm, slightly altered, but still forward-moving. As I stood at the same observation point where everything had changed, I found no comfort in understanding what had happened. But I found meaning in the effort to respond, with care, with improvement, with reflection. Tragedy leaves questions. Not all receive answers, but some become warnings, quiet messages carved into the structure of cities. What happened in Zhuhai was sudden, deliberate, and painful, but it did not break the city. It only reminded us that safety is never static. It must be watched, guarded, and reimagined again and again. Story 3. The canal waters were unusually still that evening. Amsterdam, in early November, had settled into a rhythm of late autumn chill, where fog clung to bicycles and the scent of damp leaves followed you through the narrow lanes. I had been in the city for nearly a month, researching patterns of civic unrest in European capitals for a conflict resolution institute based in Geneva. My focus wasn't political nor journalistic. I observed, recorded, and analyzed environments where discontent simmered, not to predict violence, but to understand how cities braced for and recovered from it. What brought me to Amsterdam in early November 2024 was a convergence of subtle signals. Economic protests organized online, rising frustration with housing costs, and quiet discussions in community forums about inequality, surveillance, and identity. Nothing outwardly alarming, but tension has a way of hiding in plain sight. On the morning of November 6th, I walked from my temporary flat into Pijpetoor Dam Square, where a planned gathering had been approved by the city council. The demonstration was intended to be peaceful, permit in place, police presence coordinated, and local shops preemptively closed for the afternoon. My role was to record crowd behavior and monitor real-time communication methods, how digital coordination translated to street movement. By noon, the square had begun to fill. Signs were raised, chants echoed softly, and a line of uniformed officers maintained a respectful distance. For hours, the atmosphere remained calm. I stood near a tram stop, observing from behind a low metal barricade. Conversations, live streams, and handheld placards revealed frustration, but also a clear desire for nonviolence. It wasn't a riot. It was a statement, but the shift began subtly. Near the edge of the crowd, a cluster of masked individuals emerged, not with signs, but with flares and black hoods. They didn't speak, didn't chant. They moved with coordination that didn't match the tone of the demonstration. Police formed a tighter line. A few individuals attempted to de-escalate, but the moment passed quickly. A flare arced overhead, landing near a shop awning. Shouts followed, then panic. Crowds pushed in multiple directions. Police vehicles moved in. The square scattered into a dozen side streets. I remained pressed against a wall, watching the protest unravel into fragments. Not all participants fled. Some regrouped. Others attempted to block traffic. Fireworks were ignited and thrown, not as celebration, but as confusion. My phone buzzed with alerts from municipal feeds. Avoid Centrum. Public transport suspended. By evening, it was no longer a protest. Clusters of young people moved through the streets in cycles of disruption, blocking intersections, confronting officers, spray painting facades. Windows were not shattered with malice, but as symbols, as signs. The city responded with caution, strategic dispersals, water cannons, rapid arrest units. But it was clear they had not anticipated this level of coordination. I spent the night moving through different neighborhoods, carefully documenting the transformation of space. Leidsplein, usually bright and loud with nightlife, was dark and quiet except for the occasional drone above. In Jordan, community members stood in front of local cafes, guarding them from damage. In Oost, lights flickered as rolling power checks took place. I did not film people's faces. I recorded movements, sequences, timelines. The following morning, November 7th, the city was holding its breath. Cleanup crews began working before sunrise. Trams remained suspended through the center. Dam Square was sealed. Most residents remained indoors, eyes glued to news feeds. I returned to the outskirts, to a district called Slotervaart, where another smaller demonstration had formed. This one was different, more subdued, more deliberate. It was a response not only to the original protest's cause, but to its derailment. The rioting had not been a spontaneous reaction. That much became clear by afternoon. Reports indicated multiple groups had traveled into Amsterdam overnight. Some were known for prior disruptions in other cities. Their intent was not to voice grievances, but to destabilize legitimate protest. The police confirmed that several of those arrested held no residence in the Netherlands. Their affiliations, though not labeled extremist, suggested a network that had grown adept at hijacking causes. The city took a measured approach to restoration. Rather than declare emergency powers, officials opened public forums. Community leaders were invited into policy meetings. Shop owners were compensated, and transportation was gradually restored. The narrative was not one of panic, but of resilience. I submitted my report to the Institute by the end of the week. It detailed the timeline from demonstration to disruption, the methods of movement, and the effectiveness of the city's containment strategy. But what stayed with me was not the data. It was a conversation I overheard, one of the few I let myself absorb, between two shopkeepers boarding up their windows on the second day. One of them had written a message in chalk, "Protect each other." That sentiment echoed everywhere in the days that followed. Graffiti covered with art, volunteers sweeping glass from sidewalks, small bookstores offering tea to passers-by. It was Amsterdam's quiet rebuttal to what had happened. The riots had come and gone, but the city had refused to be defined by them. When I left a week later, the canals were still again. Trams hummed along restored tracks. Bicycles lined the bridges. The scars remained, of course, but they had been folded into the rhythm of the city's memory. A reminder, a warning, but not a defeat. Story 4. The first chill of winter had settled over Seattle, softening the city's edges with mist and quiet drizzle. I arrived in early November to continue a project I had begun the previous year, an independent field study into patterns of violent crime in American urban centers. Seattle, with its blend of innovation and unrest, was a city that demanded close attention, not just because of its crime statistics, but because of how it changed between neighborhoods, between hours, between rain and silence. The city wasn't unfamiliar to me. I had walked its streets before, Capitol Hill, Pioneer Square, Belltown, charting how people moved, how they gathered, how they dispersed. But this time, I was following a more specific trail, a recent uptick in isolated knife-related assaults that had unsettled parts of the downtown core. They weren't connected, at least not officially. The incidents were described as random, often occurring late at night or in quiet corners where light didn't quite reach. I had arrived on November 6th and spent the next day walking through known locations tied to the past few attacks. Not to intrude, not to investigate like law enforcement would, but to observe lighting conditions, sightlines, nearby exits, and foot traffic at different times. My interest wasn't the crime itself, but how the environment allowed it to happen, how space could be complicit. It was the evening of November 7th when the atmosphere shifted. A news bulletin lit up on my phone just before 8 p.m. 2 new incidents within an hour of each other. One near Westlake Park, the other closer to the waterfront. Details were sparse. Both victims were hospitalized. Both had been alone. Police presence increased immediately, and roads were quietly rerouted in certain pockets of the city. I made my way to Westlake, keeping to the perimeters. I wasn't chasing anything. I simply needed to see what had changed. The streets, though not empty, carried an unfamiliar edge. Conversations were hushed, and even the cafes that usually spilled warmth onto the sidewalks had drawn their doors closed. I noted where streetlights flickered, where pedestrian visibility dropped, where temporary fences cast unnatural shadows across alleys. The city had turned inward. By midnight, a third incident was reported, this time further north, near the edge of the University District. The police did not confirm a connection between the cases, but the timing, method, and victim profile suggested a pattern. My contacts, former colleagues in urban safety research, were already sharing encrypted updates. There were no known motives, no witnesses beyond vague descriptions. A lone figure, fast-moving, vanishing into the dark. The following morning, I revisited the mapped locations, tracing the city's response. Patrols had doubled. Temporary lighting had been installed in 2 underpasses. Surveillance drones hovered just above visibility range in certain districts. But the most notable change was in the people. Ceadalites, known for their reserved pace, had begun to move differently. Faster, eyes up, shoulders back, alert but not panicked. It was as though the city itself had absorbed the unease and was carrying it forward like fog. Later that day, on November 8th, I was invited unofficially to review limited footage from one of the affected zones. A city liaison, someone I had worked with on prior safety initiatives, trusted my neutrality. The footage was brief, a blurred silhouette, quick, precise movement, then retreat. No face, no distinguishing features, but the body language suggested control, not rage. There was no erratic energy, no hesitation. Whoever was behind it was deliberate. Throughout that day, news cycles swirled. Rumors grew of motives, of targets, of possible messages. But law enforcement remained measured. No leaks, No speculation, only reminders for public vigilance. The lack of chaos, in a way, made everything feel sharper. The city wasn't unraveling. It was holding its breath. By dusk, the city had entered a kind of temporary balance. No new incidents, no arrests, just quiet movement and controlled visibility. Still, I walked. I followed routes that connected the incidents, not directly but spatially. I looked for patterns in urban layout, lighting, crowd behavior. There were gaps, always gaps. Blind corners, shielded paths, moments between street lamps where nothing could be seen. It was there, in those gaps, that the city became vulnerable. In the days that followed, I compiled my findings. A spatial analysis of each location, noting points of access, lines of retreat, and timing patterns based on surveillance timestamps. My report didn't name a suspect. It wasn't designed to, but it highlighted what made the attacks possible, not intent but opportunity. Seattle responded with its own rhythm. Police visibility remained high. Community watch programs emerged organically. Local tech companies offered drone support to law enforcement. But more than any of that, it was the people. Residents taking alternate routes, walking in pairs, avoiding known blind spots, that ultimately shifted the city's vulnerability. The attacker was never publicly identified. Some say it was one person. Others suspect a series of copycats. Official statements were cautious. No names, no theories, just a reminder that crime, especially when silent and calculated, doesn't always come with clarity. I left Seattle a week later. The rain hadn't stopped. The mist still clung to the hills. But something had changed, not just in infrastructure or policy, but in awareness. The city had blinked, briefly, and in that moment of darkness, something had stepped through. But it had also closed ranks, adapted, and learned. The Seattle stabbings, as the media later called them, didn't define the city, but they became a mirror showing how fast calm can shift, how narrow the line is between routine and threat, and how vital it is to study the space between shadows, where danger waits not with fury, but with patience. Story 5. The morning air in Wuxi was crisp and clear when I arrived, the faint scent of jasmine from nearby gardens mingling with the distant hum of traffic. My purpose here was both professional and deeply personal, to understand how schools, centers of learning and community, cope with sudden crises that shake their foundations. The event I had come to document, the stabbing incident at a local middle school on November 16, 2024, was one such crisis. My role was not to sensationalize, but to observe, analyze, and reflect on the social, environmental, and institutional factors that shaped the incident and its aftermath. What made a place of education vulnerable to violence? How did the community respond? And most importantly, how did healing begin? The school itself was situated in a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by low-rise residential buildings and narrow lanes. It was a place that, to any visitor, radiated order and routine. Children moving between classes, teachers supervising, parents dropping off their young ones. Yet beneath this familiar surface, tensions could quietly accumulate. Academic pressure, social challenges, mental health issues, all elements I knew could converge unpredictably. November 16th began like any other day. Students arrived with backpacks, some chatting quietly, others lost in their own thoughts. I walked the perimeter, noting entrances, exits, and the layout of classrooms. The campus was well maintained, with security measures in place, ID checks at the main gate, CCTV cameras, and a visible staff presence. But as my interviews with faculty later revealed, these protocols were designed more to monitor attendance and ensure punctuality than to prevent rare acts of violence. The stabbing occurred during mid-morning in a corridor near the science wing. The precise details remained confidential, as per local privacy laws and respect for those involved. What I gathered from official sources and staff accounts was that the incident was brief but traumatic. The assailant was a student, young, conflicted, and evidently overwhelmed by circumstances that were difficult to fully unpack. What struck me was the speed and coordination of the response. Teachers immediately moved to secure classrooms and calm students, while staff alerted emergency services and school administrators. The local police and medical teams arrived within minutes, demonstrating a preparedness that had been refined through past training drills and community cooperation. In the hours following, the school transformed into a hub of activity. Parents gathered in a nearby community center, seeking information and reassurance. Counselors and psychologists were deployed to provide support to students and staff alike. The atmosphere was heavy, yet marked by a determined commitment to care rather than panic. Over the next days, I observed how Wuxie's educational authorities worked closely with local government and health agencies to address the incident's fallout. A series of meetings were held, not publicized broadly but crucial in shaping a coordinated approach to prevention, intervention, and recovery. Key themes emerged from my research. First, the importance of early identification of students at risk. The school had counseling services, but resources were stretched thin, and stigma around mental health persisted. The incident prompted calls for expanded support systems and greater community awareness. Second, the role of communication, transparent, compassionate, and consistent in rebuilding trust. The school's leadership maintained open channels with parents and media, emphasizing facts over speculation and focusing on collective resilience. Third, the physical environment itself. While the school had basic security features, the incident highlighted the need for better monitoring of informal spaces, corridors, stairwells, and secluded corners where supervision was limited. Throughout my time in Wuxi, I spoke with many individuals, teachers, administrators, local officials, who expressed both sorrow and resolve. Their narratives revealed a city unwilling to let this tragedy define it, choosing instead to learn and adapt. I also witnessed the quiet strength of the students, returning to classrooms, resuming routines, yet carrying a new awareness of vulnerability and solidarity. Their behavior was a testament to human resilience and the power of community in healing. The broader societal context could not be ignored. China, like many nations, was grappling with rapid social change, urbanization, and shifting family dynamics. These pressures inevitably influenced young people navigating academic and personal challenges. In the weeks following the stabbing, Wuxi implemented enhanced safety protocols, increased counseling staff, upgraded surveillance systems, and programs focused on emotional well-being. Workshops for teachers on recognizing early warning signs became mandatory. Community outreach emphasized mental health education and support for families. I returned one final time to the school in late November. The campus had regained its calm, though a subtle shift lingered, an undercurrent of vigilance mingled with hope. Students clustered in groups, teachers moved purposefully, and the sense of collective care was palpable. My report, submitted to an international education safety coalition, highlighted the incident as a case study in crisis response, community resilience, and the ongoing need for comprehensive support structures in schools. It was not a story of blame or fear, but of cautious optimism. The Wuxi school stabbing was a somber reminder of fragility within places designed for growth and learning. Yet it was also a story of how a community faced adversity with dignity, transparency, and a commitment to better protect its future. As I left Wuxi, the sun setting behind distant hills, I carried with me a renewed understanding. Safety in schools is not a static condition but a continuous process, a mosaic of care, vigilance, and empathy woven together by the people who live, work, and learn within them. Story 6. November in Manhattan brings a crispness to the air that sharpens the senses. The city's relentless pace never seems to slow, but as winter approaches, there is a subtle shift. Streets become more crowded with those seeking shelter, and the tension between visibility and invisibility among the city's homeless population becomes more pronounced. I arrived in the days leading up to November 18, 2024, to continue my research into the complex interactions between urban safety, social services, and vulnerable populations. That morning, a series of incidents would grip the city's attention and challenge many assumptions about public safety and social responsibility. Reports began trickling in of a stabbing spree targeting homeless individuals scattered throughout Lower Manhattan. The police described the events as a series of isolated attacks occurring within a narrow time frame but linked by common characteristics. The victims, all unhoused, were randomly chosen, and the attacks were sudden and swift. Despite the gravity of the events, law enforcement and community services moved quickly to respond with a focus on prevention, support, and communication. I made my way to the affected neighborhoods, areas around the Bowery, Chinatown, and parts of the financial district. These streets are often overlooked, yet they hold a tapestry of human stories, resilience, and hardship. The homeless community in Manhattan is diverse. Veterans, immigrants, mentally ill, and those fallen through societal cracks. I had worked with outreach organizations before, so my entrance was quiet, respectful, seeking to observe rather than intrude. What struck me immediately was the city's response. Patrols were increased, but so was the presence of social workers and medical teams. Volunteers distributed warm clothing and blankets, while counselors set up stations for immediate emotional support. The city seemed to understand that security was only one part of the equation, that care and connection were essential to healing. The attacks themselves, though alarming, were carefully contextualized in the broader conversation about homelessness and violence in urban centers. The assailant was described as a young man, acting alone, motivated by personal turmoil rather than any broader agenda. This nuance mattered. Violent acts rarely emerge in a vacuum, and addressing root causes required more than just policing. I spent time walking the routes the attacker was believed to have taken, noting the urban geography that shaped these events. Narrow alleyways, dimly lit corners, and underpasses created spaces where vulnerability increased. Yet these same spaces were where community members and outreach workers often gathered, offering companionship and basic necessities. The next phase of my investigation focused on the social services network: shelters, outreach programs, mental health facilities, and emergency response teams. These systems were stretched thin, a reflection of larger societal challenges. But I witnessed determination, innovation, and collaboration among those dedicated to supporting the city's most vulnerable. Media coverage, while initially sensational, shifted tone as authorities and advocates emphasized empathy and solutions. I observed community meetings where voices of homeless individuals were heard, calling for respect, dignity, and more resources rather than fear or exclusion. By November 20th, the assailant was apprehended. Official statements emphasized the importance of mental health treatment and rehabilitation alongside legal consequences. The incident sparked citywide discussions on how violence and homelessness intersect and what preventative measures could be enhanced. I returned to the neighborhoods days later, sensing a city striving to mend. Graffiti murals appeared honoring resilience and hope. Neighborhood groups organized safety patrols in cooperation with police and outreach workers. Donations of food and clothing increased, and a renewed focus on affordable housing initiatives gained momentum. My report, compiled over weeks of observation, underscored a central truth. Violence against the homeless is both a symptom and a catalyst of urban neglect. Addressing it requires a holistic approach, one that blends public safety with social justice and enforcement with empathy. Manhattan's stabbing spree was a tragedy that exposed fractures, but it also illuminated strengths of a city that, despite its flaws, refused to turn away from its most vulnerable. The streets, once shadowed by fear, gradually reclaimed light through collective care and commitment. As I left Manhattan, the city's skyline glittered against the evening sky. The past week's events lingered in my mind as a reminder. Beneath the towering facades and ceaseless energy, lives are intertwined in fragile balance. True safety emerges not from isolation or force, but from connection, understanding, and the willingness to face hard truths together. Story 7. November in Changde arrives with a quiet chill that settles over the city's streets and rivers. When I reached the city in Hunan province on November 20th, 2024, the day after a disturbing event had unfolded here, there was a subtle tension in the air, one that spoke of shock but also a community determined to find calm after sudden turmoil. Changde is a city of contrasts. Ancient neighborhoods with narrow lanes and traditional markets intersect with rapidly developing commercial districts and residential complexes. It is a place where life flows with a rhythm shaped by both long-held customs and the pressures of modernization. The event that brought me here, a car attack on November 19th, had disrupted that rhythm, reminding all how quickly normal life can be unsettled. The attack took place in the afternoon near a popular park and a busy intersection. These were public spaces where residents of all ages gathered. Families walking together, elderly neighbors practicing Tai Chi, street vendors setting up their stalls. The choice of location amplified the sense of vulnerability because this was a place woven tightly into the social fabric of Cheongda. I arrived to find the area marked off with police tape and officials carefully managing access. The cleanup crews were already working to restore the scene to its usual order, but the sense of loss lingered. People moved with a certain hesitation, their eyes scanning the surroundings as if the familiar streets had been made unfamiliar overnight. My purpose here was to understand what happened, how the city responded, and what lessons could be drawn. I began by examining the timeline of events reconstructed from official sources and witness reports. A vehicle had been driven deliberately into a crowded area, causing injuries and fear. The driver was quickly identified as a local man, whose personal struggles were reportedly a factor in his actions. Though details about his motives remained guarded, the focus of authorities was on ensuring safety and providing care to those affected. The city's emergency response was swift. Police units were on scene within minutes, securing the area and beginning their investigation. Medical teams were dispatched to nearby hospitals, prepared to treat injuries and provide emotional support. The effectiveness of this response reflected years of training and coordination among Cheongda's public safety departments. Visiting the hospital, I witnessed a healthcare system operating under pressure, but with professionalism and compassion. Though privacy regulations limited what I could learn about individual victims, I observed staff working efficiently to provide care and counselors offering support to those traumatized. Moving back to the scene of the attack, I studied the urban landscape. The intersection was complex, with multiple lanes, crosswalks, and adjacent parks. Traffic signals and surveillance cameras were present, but gaps in physical barriers allowed the possibility for a vehicle to enter pedestrian spaces if a driver intended harm. This revealed a challenge common to many growing cities, balancing accessibility with safety. Cheongda's city planners had already announced a review of public space design to address vulnerabilities exposed by this incident. Proposals included reinforced pedestrian zones, improved lighting, and clearer signage to prevent future attacks. Beyond the physical environment, I turned my attention to the social context. Conversations with local social workers and community organizers highlighted a city aware of mental health challenges among its population. The suspected driver was reportedly struggling with personal issues, underscoring the importance of accessible mental health resources and early intervention. Public awareness campaigns were being launched to educate citizens about recognizing signs of distress and seeking help. Schools, workplaces, and community centers prepared to host workshops aimed at reducing stigma and promoting emotional well-being. Throughout my time in Cheongda, I noted the quiet resilience of the residents. Despite the trauma, life continued. Markets reopened, children returned to playgrounds, and public spaces gradually regained their warmth. Community members organized to check on vulnerable neighbors, volunteer groups provided assistance, and local leaders emphasized unity and healing. This first day of investigation impressed upon me the complexity of modern urban life, where safety is influenced not only by physical infrastructure but by social networks, health systems, and collective responsibility. As evening fell over Cheongda, the city's river reflected soft glimmers of light from surrounding buildings. I felt the weight of what had occurred, but also the determination of a city committed to recovering and learning from tragedy. Page 2. The following morning, I set out to deepen my understanding of Cheongda's emergency response protocols and community resilience. My first stop was the local police station, where I observed the meticulous work being done behind the scenes. Officers reviewed surveillance footage from nearby cameras, reconstructing the exact path of the vehicle as it entered the pedestrian area. Their efforts highlighted the importance of integrated technology in modern investigations, how data from multiple sources can quickly create a clearer picture of unfolding events. While the investigation was ongoing, the priority remained ensuring public safety and rebuilding trust in communal spaces. The police had increased patrols in sensitive areas, and city officials worked closely with community leaders to maintain open communication. These measures, though temporary, helped ease anxieties among residents wary of sudden violence. Cheongda's public transportation hubs and busy markets reflected a city striving to regain normalcy. I noticed signs and banners promoting mental health awareness and emergency preparedness. These initiatives were part of a larger plan developed in collaboration with social service agencies, schools, and healthcare providers. By fostering a culture of openness and support, the city aimed to prevent incidents stemming from isolation or untreated emotional distress. In speaking with social workers, I learned of the challenges they faced. Stigma around mental health remained significant, particularly among older generations. However, younger Cheongda residents appeared more willing to engage with counseling and peer support programs. These shifts suggested a slowly evolving social landscape, where traditional values met the needs of contemporary urban life. The physical environment of the attack site offered further insight into the city's vulnerabilities and potential improvements. The intersection, while designed to facilitate traffic flow and pedestrian access, lacked sufficient barriers to separate vehicles from foot traffic in certain zones. The city's planners were already drafting proposals to install protective bollards and redesign walkways for greater safety. Urban design experts I consulted emphasized that creating secure public spaces requires a balance, preserving openness and accessibility while incorporating subtle safety features that deter harmful actions. Such projects take time but reflect a commitment to long-term resilience. Throughout the day, I witnessed community-driven initiatives emerging. Volunteers handed out flyers explaining signs of distress and resources available for mental health support. Local residents organized neighborhood watch groups, emphasizing collective responsibility for safety and well-being. This grassroots engagement contrasted with the sterile official statements often seen in such incidents. It showed a community actively processing trauma and seeking to heal together. The collective determination to transform tragedy into a catalyst for positive change was palpable. At a local cultural center, a team prepared to launch workshops for parents and educators, focusing on early recognition of emotional difficulties in children and teenagers. Mental health professionals stressed that timely intervention could prevent crises and reduce stigma. As I documented these developments, I considered the broader implications. The Cheongda attack was a stark reminder that urban safety involves more than just physical security measures. It demands integrated social support, accessible healthcare, education, and public awareness. While the incident was tragic, the city's response offered a blueprint for resilience, combining swift emergency response, community engagement, and preventive strategies. Cheongda was charting a course toward a safer, more supportive future. As twilight descended, I took one last walk near the park where the attack had occurred. Families strolled quietly, some pausing near flower beds placed in memory of those affected. The scene was sober but hopeful, a testament to human endurance and the strength of community bonds. Page 3. In the days following the attack, my investigation broadened to include the psychological and social dimensions affecting both survivors and the wider community. I spent time at a local counseling center, where mental health professionals were working quietly yet tirelessly to provide support. Many residents came seeking comfort and reassurance, reflecting the deep emotional impact such an event leaves behind, even for those not physically harmed. These sessions underscored the importance of accessible mental health care, particularly in urban settings where rapid social change can leave individuals feeling isolated. The counselors emphasized that community education was a key component in their work, aiming to reduce fear and encourage openness. Cheongda's municipal government had begun allocating additional funding to mental health services and community outreach programs. This financial commitment was a critical step, as previous resources had been limited and demand was growing steadily. The attack acted as a catalyst, pushing mental health higher on the city's agenda. Meanwhile, I observed how local media covered the event. Journalists balanced the need to inform with sensitivity, avoiding sensationalism that could inflame fear or stigmatize individuals involved. Reports often highlighted stories of heroism, bystanders who helped others, first responders who acted swiftly, and neighbors who rallied to support those affected. This responsible journalism contributed to a community atmosphere focused on recovery rather than blame. It reminded me how media plays a powerful role in shaping public perception and fostering social cohesion after traumatic events. My attention also turned to the driver at the center of the incident. While respecting privacy and legal processes, I sought to understand the factors contributing to his actions. Discussions with social workers suggested a complex interplay of personal hardship, untreated mental health issues, and social isolation. Such circumstances are not unique to Cheongda, but the city's evolving support structures aim to identify and assist at-risk individuals before situations escalate. Cheongda's police and social services collaborated on programs to improve outreach and early intervention. These initiatives included community visits, hotline services, and coordination with local healthcare providers. The goal was to create a safety net that could detect warning signs and offer help proactively. On a practical level, the city's urban planners continued their work to enhance public safety. The intersection where the attack occurred was redesigned with new pedestrian barriers and expanded sidewalks to create a buffer zone between vehicles and foot traffic. Improved lighting and clearer signage were installed, contributing to a safer environment. These changes demonstrated how urban design can play a preventive role, reducing opportunities for harm while maintaining the openness essential to vibrant public life. Throughout my time in Cheongda, I was struck by the quiet strength of its people. Despite the tragedy, the city showed an unwavering commitment to healing and progress. This resilience was reflected not only in official responses but in the daily acts of kindness and solidarity witnessed throughout neighborhoods. My investigation also highlighted the importance of balancing security measures with compassion. It became clear that safeguarding a city requires addressing underlying social needs as much as physical protections. As I prepared to leave Cheongda, I reflected on the multifaceted nature of urban safety, how it encompasses infrastructure, emergency response, mental health, media responsibility, and community cohesion. The car attack was a sobering event, but the city's response illustrated a hopeful path forward. Cheongda's experience serves as a reminder that in the face of adversity, collective effort and thoughtful planning can foster recovery and resilience. The lessons here resonate beyond this single city, offering guidance for urban centers worldwide seeking to build safer, more supportive environments for all. The weeks following the attack marked a period of reflection and action for the city of Cheongda. As I remained immersed in the local environment, it became clear that recovery extended beyond repairing physical damage or improving infrastructure. It involved healing the collective spirit of the community. One aspect that stood out was the role of education in shaping a safer future. Schools across Cheongda integrated mental health awareness into their curricula, teaching children and adolescents about emotional well-being, stress management, and how to seek help. These programs were designed to foster resilience from a young age, equipping students with tools to navigate personal challenges and support one another. Teachers and administrators received additional training to recognize signs of distress and to create supportive classroom environments. The emphasis was on prevention, understanding, and inclusivity, aiming to reduce stigma and encourage openness. Community centers hosted regular forums where residents could share concerns and suggestions regarding public safety. These gatherings offered a platform for dialogue between citizens and local authorities, fostering transparency and trust. Residents expressed appreciation for being heard and involved in decisions that affected their daily lives. I also learned about volunteer groups that had sprung up organically. Local residents organized patrols and wellness checks, particularly focusing on elderly and vulnerable neighbors. These grassroots efforts exemplified how civic engagement could enhance safety through simple acts of care and vigilance. Cheongda's city government supported these initiatives by providing resources and coordinating efforts among various departments. Collaboration between social services, law enforcement, healthcare providers, and urban planners became a model of integrated response and prevention. As my visit drew to a close, I observed the subtle but meaningful changes in the cityscape. New safety installations were complete or underway. Community art projects appeared, depicting themes of hope, unity, and renewal. The once somber public spaces regained warmth, reflecting the collective determination to move forward without forgetting. This transformation was a testament to the resilience that often emerges in the aftermath of adversity. Cheongda's experience highlighted the interconnectedness of physical safety, mental health, social support, and civic responsibility. For me, the investigation was more than documenting an event. It was a journey into the heart of a community's response to crisis. The attack on November 19th was tragic, but the city's multifaceted recovery efforts demonstrated the power of empathy, planning, and collaboration. Changde offered valuable lessons on how urban centers can confront unexpected threats while nurturing the well-being of their inhabitants. In every gesture of care and every policy enacted, I saw a city reaffirming its commitment to the safety and dignity of all residents. As I prepared to depart, I carried with me not only the facts of the incident, but a deeper understanding of resilience, a quality that defines communities capable of rising above tragedy toward a better future. On my final day in Changde, I took time to reflect on the city's journey since the attack. The physical scars of the incident had been largely repaired, but it was the emotional and social recovery that left the most lasting impression. The resilience of the people, their willingness to come together, and the deliberate efforts to address root causes of such incidents illustrated a community determined not to be defined by tragedy. I revisited the park near the intersection, now vibrant with life once again. Children's laughter filled the air, elders practiced Tai Chi, and neighbors exchanged greetings, scenes of normalcy that felt hard-earned. Memorial flowers remained, but they were joined by signs of hope. Community boards promoting mental wellness events, posters encouraging kindness, and public art celebrating unity. The city had also begun hosting workshops for urban planners and emergency responders across the region, sharing the lessons learned from this incident. Changde's approach, combining physical security improvements with social programs and public engagement, was gaining recognition as a model for holistic urban safety. Throughout my time here, I recognized that urban safety and well-being are ongoing processes, requiring vigilance, compassion, and adaptability. The attack was a painful reminder of vulnerabilities, but also a catalyst for positive transformation. As I prepared to leave Changde, I thought about the many lives touched by that day, those directly affected, the responders who acted swiftly, and the countless residents who chose healing over fear. Their collective strength was a powerful testament to human resilience. This true crime story is not only about an event, but about the profound capacity of a community to confront adversity and emerge stronger. Changde's experience teaches that when cities prioritize mental health, social connection, and thoughtful urban design alongside emergency readiness, they build safer, more compassionate spaces for all. The memory of November 19, 2024 will endure, but it will do so as part of a larger narrative, one of recovery, learning, and hope. Story 8. The morning air in Wirral on November 10, 2024, held a stillness that contrasted sharply with the events of the previous day. I arrived in this coastal borough just hours after a troubling incident had unfolded, a stabbing involving teenagers that shook the local community. Though the details were carefully managed by authorities to protect privacy, the impact of the event rippled through neighborhoods, schools, and families. Wirral is a place known for its blend of suburban calm and natural beauty, with quiet streets, parks, and a strong sense of community. It was precisely this environment that made the incident feel all the more jarring, a stark reminder that even seemingly peaceful places are not immune to sudden violence. The scene I visited was a public park near a residential area, where the incident reportedly took place. Police tape cordoned off a section near a pathway lined with trees and benches, a spot where local children often played and neighbors gathered. Though the physical traces of the event had been cleared, a certain tension lingered, carried in the cautious glances of passers-by and the hushed conversations I overheard. My goal was to understand not only the facts of the incident, but also the broader social context. What drives such violence among youth? How does a community respond and heal? And what preventive measures can be put in place to reduce the risk of recurrence? From the outset, I learned that the local authorities approached the case with sensitivity and urgency. The involved teenagers were identified, and support was offered to victims and families alike. Schools and social services collaborated to provide counseling and guidance, emphasizing care and restoration over punishment alone. During my conversations with local community workers and educators, it became clear that youth violence, while not widespread, was a concern that had been growing gradually. Factors such as social pressures, family dynamics, and access to support services all played a role. Programs aimed at early intervention were in place, but challenges remained in reaching all at-risk individuals. One aspect that resonated strongly was the community's commitment to addressing root causes rather than simply reacting to incidents. Neighborhood groups organized outreach efforts, youth clubs expanded their activities, and local leaders advocated for increased resources dedicated to mental health and social well-being. At the heart of this approach was the recognition that violence among teenagers often signals deeper struggles: loneliness, frustration, or a search for identity. Creating safe spaces where young people could express themselves, find mentorship, and build positive relationships was seen as essential. I spent time visiting several youth centers, observing programs designed to engage teens in constructive activities ranging from sports to creative arts. Staff shared stories of progress and setbacks, highlighting how trust and patience are crucial in making a difference. The Wirral incident, while tragic, sparked a renewed focus on community cohesion and youth support. Public forums were scheduled to involve residents in discussions about safety, inclusion, and shared responsibility. Walking through the streets of Wirral, I felt the underlying strength of a community determined to protect its young people. The incident was a painful reminder of vulnerabilities, but it also galvanized efforts toward prevention, healing, and hope. The investigation into the incident unfolded with a careful balance of transparency and discretion. Law enforcement officials worked diligently to piece together the events leading to the stabbing, relying on eyewitness accounts, forensic evidence, and community input. Their approach aimed to ensure justice while respecting the sensitive nature of involving young individuals. I visited the local police precinct to observe the ongoing efforts. Officers and detectives demonstrated a clear understanding of the complexities when handling youth-related crimes, emphasizing rehabilitation alongside accountability. Community policing initiatives, already in place, became even more vital in fostering trust between residents and authorities. Beyond the immediate response, I was drawn to the broader narrative surrounding youth well-being in Wirral. Several local organizations had been addressing issues such as bullying, family breakdown, and social isolation, all factors linked to increased risk of violence. These organizations operated in schools, community centers, and through home visits, aiming to build support networks around vulnerable teenagers. One key element stood out during my research: communication. Open, honest dialogue between teens, parents, educators, and support workers was essential to identify and address problems before they escalated. Programs encouraging such conversations had met with encouraging results, though some barriers persisted due to stigma or mistrust. I also learned about efforts to create safe physical environments. Public spaces were reviewed for potential risks, and improvements like better lighting, increased visibility, and the presence of community volunteers helped make parks and streets more welcoming and secure. In addition, mental health services were being expanded to offer accessible, youth-friendly care. Recognizing that emotional distress often precedes violent behavior, professionals worked to destigmatize seeking help. Outreach campaigns used social media and local events to spread awareness and connect young people to resources. Throughout my visit, I noticed a strong emphasis on inclusion and empowerment. Community leaders promoted activities that nurtured skills, confidence, and positive identity formation. From sports teams to arts programs, these initiatives offered constructive outlets and fostered a sense of belonging. The incident in Wirral became a catalyst, not only for reflection but for proactive change. Schools introduced peer mentoring schemes, creating opportunities for older students to support younger ones. Families received workshops on conflict resolution and effective communication. While the event itself was unsettling, it underscored the importance of collective responsibility. Residents expressed a shared commitment to looking out for one another, particularly the youth. This social cohesion became a foundation for resilience. As evening fell, I walked past the community center where a group of teenagers gathered for an art therapy session. Their animated discussion and laughter served as a hopeful reminder. Despite adversity, growth and healing were possible. Wirral's journey toward recovery was ongoing, but the determination of its people was clear. The stabbing was a tragic chapter, yet it also marked the beginning of renewed efforts to build a safer, more supportive environment for its younger generation. In the weeks that followed the incident, I observed the ripple effects that such a moment had on the fabric of the community. It became apparent that the impact extended far beyond the individuals directly involved. Families, schools, and neighbors found themselves grappling with feelings of shock, vulnerability, and a pressing need for answers. Local schools, in particular, took swift and thoughtful action. Counselors were made readily available to students, and assemblies were held to promote awareness about conflict resolution and emotional well-being. The educators I spoke with stressed the importance of creating a safe space where students could express their fears and frustrations without judgment. Conversations with school staff revealed a dedication to nurturing emotional intelligence and resilience as key tools in preventing future incidents. The integration of social and emotional learning into daily teaching aimed to empower young people to manage stress, communicate effectively, and build healthy relationships. At the same time, community outreach intensified. Neighborhood watch groups increased their presence in public spaces, not as enforcers but as friendly eyes and ears, offering guidance, assistance, and a reassuring presence. These efforts were met with appreciation from residents, who valued the sense of connection and collective care. I also noted the role of local media in shaping the community's response. Reports were careful to avoid sensationalism, instead focusing on factual updates and highlighting resources for support. This measured approach helped to prevent fear from spreading and encouraged constructive dialogue. Social media, while a tool for information sharing, also required mindful management. Community leaders and youth workers worked to counter misinformation and encourage positive online interactions among young people, recognizing the influence digital spaces have on behavior and mood. Throughout my time in Wirral, the theme of compassion emerged repeatedly. Rather than stigmatizing those involved, there was a collective emphasis on understanding circumstances and providing help. This perspective was reflected in the words of social workers who spoke about the importance of trauma-informed care, recognizing how past experiences can shape present actions. Neighborhood events aimed at rebuilding trust and unity became regular fixtures. From community cleanups to cultural celebrations, these gatherings fostered connection and reminded residents of their shared humanity. The healing process was gradual, marked by small victories and ongoing dialogue. The Wirral teen stabbing, though deeply distressing, had catalyzed a community-wide awakening. It revealed gaps in support systems but also ignited a determined effort to close them. The experience underscored that safety is not just the absence of harm, but the presence of nurturing relationships, open communication, and accessible resources. As I prepared to delve deeper into the personal stories behind the headlines, I remained mindful of the balance between public interest and privacy. The lives touched by this event deserved respect and dignity, even as their stories contributed to a broader understanding of youth violence and prevention. The road ahead for Wirral was one of rebuilding, not simply bricks and mortar, but trust, hope, and connection. It was clear that these elements would define the community's strength in the face of adversity. As I continued to explore Wirral's response, it became clear that prevention was the central focus moving forward. Community leaders, educators, and social workers were united in the belief that understanding the causes behind youth violence was essential to crafting effective solutions. One of the key insights I gathered was the significance of early intervention. Many young people at risk of involvement in violent behavior often face challenges long before any incident occurred, whether related to family instability, academic struggles, or social exclusion. Identifying these signs early could mean the difference between intervention and tragedy. Local organizations had developed programs that reached out to families, offering support and resources to navigate difficulties. Parenting workshops emphasized communication and conflict resolution, equipping caregivers with tools to nurture positive development in their children. This family-centered approach was seen as foundational in creating safer environments. Peer support also played an important role. I observed youth-led initiatives where teenagers were trained to recognize signs of distress among their friends and to encourage seeking help. Empowering young people to support one another fostered a culture of empathy and responsibility. Moreover, Mental health services in Wirral were being expanded and adapted to better meet the needs of youth. Specialized counselors, accessible through schools and community centers, worked to reduce barriers such as stigma or lack of awareness. Innovative outreach programs engaged teens in familiar environments, making support more approachable. The physical environment was not overlooked. Efforts to improve public spaces with better lighting, clear sightlines, and community activity programming contributed to feelings of safety. Parks and recreation areas, once seen as isolated, were transformed into vibrant, well-monitored spaces where young people could gather positively. Throughout my time here, I witnessed a strong collaboration among various sectors: healthcare, education, law enforcement, and community groups. This multidisciplinary approach allowed for comprehensive strategies addressing the complexity of youth violence. Importantly, the community did not shy away from difficult conversations. Forums and workshops encouraged honest dialogue about challenges such as peer pressure, social media influences, and the role of conflict in adolescent development. These conversations were framed around respect, learning, and shared responsibility. I was particularly moved by the resilience of the teenagers themselves. Many expressed a desire to move past the stigma of the incident and to contribute positively to their neighborhoods. Their voices were gradually being included in planning and decision-making, recognizing that sustainable change requires their engagement. The Wirral teen stabbing had sparked a reckoning, a moment when the community confronted uncomfortable realities but chose to respond with care, commitment, and hope. The incident was not forgotten, but it became a catalyst for deeper understanding and action. As I prepared to conclude my visit, I carried with me a sense of cautious optimism. The path to healing and prevention was long and complex, but the foundations being laid were strong. Wirral's experience demonstrated that addressing youth violence demands more than enforcement. It calls for empathy, inclusion, and investment in human potential. Leaving Wirral, I reflected on how the incident had reshaped the community's outlook. The stabbing was a somber event, yet it highlighted the power of collective will to heal and improve. It reminded me that true safety stems from connection, understanding, and proactive care. The community's emphasis on nurturing youth, improving communication, and fostering resilience offered a hopeful blueprint for other towns facing similar challenges. By addressing the underlying issues early and creating supportive networks, Wirral demonstrated that tragedy need not define a place or its people. Throughout the visit, I encountered stories of kindness and courage, neighbors checking in on each other, volunteers mentoring at-risk teens, and families committed to breaking cycles of hardship. These everyday acts of compassion wove a fabric strong enough to withstand shock and uncertainty. Moreover, the collaboration among schools, social services, law enforcement, and residents revealed a model of shared responsibility. Each played a vital role, reminding me that community safety is a collective endeavor rather than the sole duty of any one group. While scars from the incident remained, they were balanced by signs of growth and renewal. Memorials stood quietly alongside banners promoting mental health awareness and invitations to community events. This coexistence of remembrance and forward-looking hope was a testament to the community's resilience. As I boarded my train out of Wirral, the crisp air carried a sense of renewal. The story of that November day was not simply one of violence, but also of courage, learning, and determination to protect future generations. For those who live in Wirral, the lessons learned are personal and ongoing. They serve as a reminder that vigilance, compassion, and engagement can transform even the darkest moments into opportunities for positive change. This true crime story is more than an account of a single incident. It is a reflection on the strength found in community bonds and the profound impact of investing in young lives. In the face of adversity, Wirral chose to stand together, fostering safety through understanding, care, and hope. Story 9. When I first heard about the knife attack attributed to a local cult in Uganda, my curiosity was piqued by the layers of complexity surrounding such incidents. The event had occurred on October 30th, but was only widely reported in November 2024, sparking discussions across communities and media outlets about the nature of secret societies, the vulnerabilities of individuals, and the challenges of law enforcement in rural and urban settings. Uganda, a country rich in cultural diversity and history, has long been home to various spiritual and traditional practices. However, the line between cultural heritage and harmful group activities can sometimes blur, creating difficult circumstances for communities and authorities alike. Arriving in the affected region, I found a place marked by both resilience and tension. The local population, while proud of their customs, faced fear and uncertainty in the aftermath of the attack. The incident had left deep emotional wounds and raised questions about safety and social cohesion. The attack itself involved a small group, reportedly linked to a secretive cult, wielding knives in a confrontation that resulted in injuries to several individuals. The reasons behind the assault were complex, rooted in long-standing disputes and possibly fueled by misinformation or fear. Police presence in the area had increased significantly, with officers conducting investigations and community outreach to gather information and reassure residents. The law enforcement approach was cautious, aimed at dismantling dangerous networks without disrupting legitimate cultural expressions. My investigation led me to meet community leaders who were deeply concerned about the incident's impact. They spoke of a desire to protect their traditions while condemning violence, emphasizing the need for education and dialogue to prevent such events from recurring. Efforts to understand the motivations behind the cult's actions revealed a mixture of social, economic, and psychological factors. Many involved young people who felt marginalized or were searching for identity and belonging. This vulnerability sometimes made them susceptible to recruitment by groups promising purpose or power. The local healthcare facilities were stretched thin as they cared for those injured during the attack. Medical staff, often working with limited resources, showed remarkable dedication. Their efforts highlighted the broader challenges faced by communities coping with sudden violence and trauma. Throughout my visit, I observed a community in the midst of recovery, grappling with fear yet determined to rebuild trust and safety. Neighborhood meetings and interfaith dialogues became platforms to foster understanding and resilience. The government and non-governmental organizations had begun initiatives focused on youth engagement and countering extremist influences. These programs aimed to offer alternatives to vulnerable individuals, promoting education, employment opportunities, and social support. Walking through villages and towns, I sensed the cautious hope that, despite setbacks, progress was possible. The incident had exposed cracks but also opened doors for collaboration among residents, authorities, and civil society. This first chapter of my report on the cult knife attack in Uganda reveals not only the stark realities of violence, but also the powerful human response to restore peace and protect community values. As I delved deeper into the aftermath of the attack, I came to appreciate the complexity of addressing such incidents in a context where tradition and modernity often intersect uneasily. The local police were navigating delicate waters, balancing the imperative to maintain law and order while respecting cultural identities. One of the most striking aspects of this situation was the influence of secretive groups, often cloaked in ritual and symbolism, whose practices were not widely understood outside their circles. These cults, as they were commonly labeled, sometimes functioned as social networks providing a sense of belonging. Yet, when veering into harmful actions, they posed serious threats. I spent time with law enforcement officers who described the painstaking work involved in investigating the attack. Gathering reliable intelligence required building trust with community members, many of whom were reluctant to speak out due to fear of retribution or loyalty to their groups. The police also faced logistical challenges, with limited resources to conduct surveillance or patrol remote areas. Nonetheless, their commitment to protecting the community was evident. Coordination with local leaders proved essential, allowing a more nuanced approach to intervention. Meanwhile, social workers and counselors worked alongside health professionals to support victims and their families. Addressing trauma was a priority, particularly as psychological wounds could linger long after physical injuries healed. Mental health services, often scarce in rural Uganda, were supplemented by community-based support groups and traditional healing practices. The socio-economic backdrop of the region played a critical role in understanding why individuals might join such groups. Poverty, unemployment, and lack of access to education left many young people searching for purpose. Cults sometimes exploited these vulnerabilities by offering promises of empowerment or protection. Educational campaigns aimed at youth became a focal point for prevention efforts. Schools incorporated lessons on critical thinking, conflict resolution, and the dangers of extremist groups. Local NGOs facilitated workshops designed to encourage dialogue and promote peaceful alternatives. Throughout my observations, the resilience of the community stood out. Religious leaders from various faiths united in condemnation of the violence, advocating for peace and coexistence. Their influence helped to counteract the divisive narratives that could fuel tension. Economic initiatives also began to take shape, focusing on skill building and entrepreneurship to provide viable opportunities for at-risk youth. These programs, supported by both governmental and international partners, sought to address root causes rather than merely symptoms. In the streets and markets, daily life slowly returned to normal. Yet, the memory of the attack lingered, a reminder of the fragility of peace. The community's response underscored the importance of vigilance, education, and collaboration in preventing future tragedies. My time in Uganda revealed a society striving to reconcile tradition with modern challenges, facing adversity with determination. The knife attack was a tragic event, but it also ignited a collective will to heal and protect the vulnerable. The days following the attack saw a palpable shift in community dynamics. I witnessed a renewed sense of solidarity as families, neighbors, and local organizations joined forces to rebuild not only the physical spaces affected, but also the social bonds that violence had strained. One of the most powerful moments during my visit was attending a community forum held in a modest town hall. The meeting was an opportunity for residents to express concerns, share experiences, and collectively envision a safer future. Though there was a solemn tone, it was evident that hope and determination were present in equal measure. Community elders spoke of the need to reclaim cultural heritage in ways that promote unity and reject violence. They reminded attendees that tradition, when honored responsibly, could serve as a foundation for healing rather than division. These messages resonated deeply, inspiring many to become active participants in peace-building efforts. At the same time, youth voices emerged with clarity and urgency. Many young people expressed frustration over the circumstances that made them vulnerable to exploitation. They called for greater access to education, mentorship, and constructive outlets for their energy and creativity. I also noted the presence of local artists and performers using their talents to foster dialogue and awareness. Music, dance, and storytelling became vehicles for conveying messages of resilience and hope, reaching audiences beyond the walls of formal meetings. The role of women in these recovery efforts was especially noteworthy. Female community leaders and activists had mobilized rapidly to support affected families, advocate for justice, and promote social programs. Their leadership underscored the importance of inclusivity in addressing complex social challenges. In parallel, law enforcement continued to pursue those responsible for the attack, collaborating with regional authorities to disrupt networks that perpetuated violence. Arrests were made cautiously, with an emphasis on fair legal processes and respect for human rights. The judicial system faced pressures to deliver justice promptly while ensuring due process. Transparency and community involvement in these proceedings were vital to maintaining public trust and preventing cycles of retribution. Behind the scenes, mental health professionals worked tirelessly, often in conditions of scarcity. They adapted creative approaches to counseling, incorporating culturally sensitive practices to support healing. Their work was a reminder that recovery extends beyond the physical, requiring attention to emotional and psychological well-being. Throughout these developments, I reflected on the interconnectedness of social factors that underpinned the incident. Violence rarely exists in isolation. It is often the product of systemic issues that require comprehensive and sustained responses. The attack had illuminated vulnerabilities, but also catalyzed an outpouring of community strength. It served as a stark reminder of the importance of vigilance, empathy, and proactive support to prevent similar events. As I prepared to explore these themes further, I remained committed to telling this story with care, recognizing the dignity of those affected and the resilience they embodied in the face of adversity. Walking through the villages surrounding the site of the attack, I encountered a mix of cautious optimism and lingering anxiety. The scars of violence were not only physical but also deeply woven into the fabric of daily life. Families who had lost loved ones or seen their communities fractured were navigating the difficult process of rebuilding trust. One aspect that stood out was the role of education, not just formal schooling, but education as a tool for empowerment and prevention. Teachers and community leaders worked tirelessly to impart lessons that extended beyond textbooks. Respect for human rights, conflict resolution, and critical thinking. Local schools became hubs of hope, offering safe spaces where young people could learn and express themselves freely. Extracurricular activities, such as sports and art, provided constructive outlets that helped divert attention from negative influences. I also observed grassroots efforts aimed at reintegrating individuals who had been involved with the cult. Rehabilitation programs emphasized understanding and compassion, focusing on healing rather than punishment alone. These initiatives aimed to break cycles of violence and foster inclusion. The involvement of faith-based organizations was another crucial element in the community's recovery. Leaders from various religious backgrounds united to promote messages of peace and reconciliation, providing spiritual guidance and practical support to those affected. At the same time, the government's response included increased funding for social services and law enforcement training. Investment in technology and intelligence gathering was prioritized to better identify and dismantle dangerous groups before violence could erupt. International aid agencies also played a supportive role, offering expertise and resources to enhance local capacities. Their involvement underscored the importance of global solidarity in addressing issues that transcend borders. Throughout my stay, I was reminded of the resilience and determination of the human spirit. The people I met embodied strength in the face of adversity, choosing healing and unity over division. This chapter of the story highlighted the ongoing journey toward peace, a journey requiring patience, dedication, and collaboration. The knife attack was a tragic event, but it became a catalyst for meaningful change. As I prepared to conclude my report, I carried with me a profound respect for the community's courage and a renewed belief in the power of collective action to overcome even the darkest challenges. In the final days of my time in Uganda, I reflected on the profound lessons embedded in this story. The attack was a harsh reminder of the fragility of peace and the dangers that arise when fear and misunderstanding take root. Yet, more importantly, it was a testament to the resilience of communities determined to heal and rebuild. The narrative of this event is not confined to the violence itself, but extends to the powerful responses that followed. It is about families finding strength in each other, leaders working tirelessly to foster peace, and a community refusing to be defined by tragedy. The collaborative efforts I witnessed, from local councils, faith groups, law enforcement, and international partners, offer a hopeful blueprint for addressing similar challenges elsewhere. They demonstrate that meaningful change is possible when empathy and pragmatism guide action. Throughout this experience, I came to appreciate the delicate balance required in addressing incidents tied to secretive groups. Respect for cultural traditions must be maintained even as harmful practices are challenged and dismantled. Navigating this balance demands patience, understanding, and unwavering commitment to justice and human dignity. As I prepared to leave, the faces of the people I met stayed with me. Individuals united by a shared vision of a safer, more harmonious future. Their stories were marked not only by hardship, but by hope, courage, and the enduring belief in the possibility of renewal. This true crime story, while rooted in a specific incident, resonates beyond borders. It underscores the universal importance of community, dialogue, and proactive engagement in the face of violence. In closing, the cult knife attack in Uganda stands as a poignant reminder that healing and progress often emerge from the most challenging of circumstances. It is a story of tragedy transformed by resilience, a story I am honored to share.